Hurricane Helene recovery is still ongoing. A lot of research into why this disaster was so awful for North Carolina, so deadly. Landslide's a big piece of that. We now know, though, that there's a system to track what areas are at risk of landslides that became a political casualty. So our Nate Morabito was looking into this. Nate, what have you found so far?
Yeah, I mean, so let's just rewind for a second. About 2 decades ago, the North Carolina legislature creates a program that essentially is going to map where landslides have occurred. There's a reason that matters. A landslide based on science is going to reoccur at some point near where it's happened before. All right? So that means if you know where there was one in the past, you know at some point, could be 100,000 years, could be 10 years, there's probably going to be another one nearby.
Sure.
So after disasters back in the mid-2000s, the legislature dedicates money, about $500,000 a year, not a ton of money when you consider it, and they start mapping counties, and they get through about 4 of them. And then kind of the rug's pulled out from under this program. We're not going to fund this program. There's pushback from builders, from realtors, and then the program sits dormant for the next 8 years. Now, you have to understand that when landslides are mapped, they're mapped at a pace of about 1 county per year. So 8 counties did not get mapped during that span. It was restarted in the late 2010s, and there were several more that were done, but the bottom line is that most counties in western North Carolina were not mapped before Helene and are still not mapped today. And so when meteorologist Brittany Van Voorhees came to me with concerns about this program back in late September, I knew we needed to look into this because this seemed very unusual, and it seems not really political. It seems like a no-brainer. It seems like common sense.
Sure.
Why wouldn't you, particularly for how little money it costs, why wouldn't you go back and start mapping these things? So we made multiple trips to western North Carolina to really answer the question, could lives have been saved? And here's a little preview of kind of most of our work so far.
I sit and look at it every day.
I think increased awareness could have made a difference.
Hit the trailer, exploded it,
It's a serious issue.
hit another house, put it on top of this house.
It's not meant to scare anybody.
By the time I look back, she was gone.
It's just meant to improve our decisions.
People have the right to know whether their lives are at risk. We could have just as easily been one of those news stories.
Did you ever know there was a landslide risk here?
No, no clue.
Why weren't they notified you might have a landslide risk at your property?
It's extremely frustrating.
Without knowing this, it literally upended my life.
People there having no idea that their homes were at risk. That's pretty shocking to hear.
Life or death information that you'd want to protect your family. And we should also point out that there were like 3,000 at least landslides
Wow.
during Helene in
Yeah.
western North Carolina. At least 31 deaths connected. So almost a third of all deaths during Helene connected to landslides. I want to show you what this mapping program looks like because there are some counties that are done, about 9 so far. And you see those red dots, you can tell where the density there is.
Yeah.
Those are the counties that have had most of the mapping done. And you can kind of zoom in and you can click on a dot and you can kind of decide, oh, was there a landslide here at some point? That's what the dot shows. And in a future story, you're going to hear from a family whose life was saved by this, okay? Because this was done in their county.
Wow.
Before they bought a home. They looked at this map, they got an expert. The expert said, do not build here. They didn't, and it really saved their life, okay? But you can see, look at all that open space there. There's so many counties in western North Carolina where even today, it's not been mapped. Now, there's also a layer here on this mapping program where you can look at landslide susceptibility. And that's where, under certain conditions, 5 inches of rain or more over 24 hours, the risk for a landslide is pretty high. The likelihood that it's going to happen is pretty high. You can see there's a lot of red when you add that layer on there, which can be scary to some people. But if you're really to zoom in, I mean, there's plenty of areas where you can build safely in western North Carolina. So this isn't meant to scare people, right? This is strictly meant to tell you, look, if you're going to build here, you should know there's a risk. What's your comfort level for the risk? And in Buncombe County, they have been a pioneer when it comes to basically trying to come up with regulations to make sure that if you're going to build there, you have to meet certain requirements. All right? So this is available. It's called North Carolina's Landslide Mapping Program. You can find it online right now. The real problem is that there's so many counties that are still unmapped.
Sure.
We interviewed a former state representative earlier today, who was really critical in bringing this program back, but was also there when it was frozen. And we have hindsight now, we have pictures, we know what the devastation was, and we now have a program director that's trying to get more money too, to help finish the mapping. We have better technology to better educate the public, because that's something that we found is a real issue as well. The probably hardest interview we've done for this is with a man named Jamie Gwynn. He's in Avery County. There's a little town in Avery County called Minneapolis. And him and his wife bought a home in Minneapolis several years ago. It's high above the river. His son's name is River, by the way, too, because you're going to hear him mention this in a second. They never thought the river was a risk. It was way below. That's the only thing they could think would ever harm them. They never looked behind their property and said, oh, I wonder if a landslide might happen one day. His wife died in a landslide.
It's awful.
So you can imagine how he feels when we tell him, basically, there was a program that was frozen for almost a decade. They didn't get to your county. He's kind of running through the what ifs all the time now. And I just want you to listen to him, because this is about real human life and human death.
Me and River ended up down in the river. I just remember being crushed and being in, I guess, complete blackness. I don't know if I had my eyes closed or if I was just covered in all the debris. And I had a split second of time to think, this is how I die. And I can remember all of a sudden stopping, and I could hear him. And luckily when we landed really close to each other, and I was able to pick pieces, I believe it was pieces of the roof, up off the top of him. Somehow Melissa was still up there where the house was. And I'm assuming another one was coming, because the last thing I heard her scream was, "Babe, watch out." And I grabbed River and got him up on the bank. But by the time I looked back, she was gone. We were looking at the river all morning, never thought nothing about behind the house. It never even occurred to me, not even a thought. Without knowing this, it literally upended my life and changed it forever. If this is something that, does get planned out, mapped out, and people know, they won't have to go through what we did. I really wouldn't wish that on anybody.
I mean, it's hard to listen to.
Just terrible. Just terrible. And, we've also found, even though some counties were done, people didn't necessarily know that this mapping program even existed. So we've got several different reports we're putting together about this. The first one's going to air tonight at 11 o'clock on WCNC Charlotte. And it's just such a critical part of the Helene story, because now we're looking in kind of with a constructively criticized eye of saying, critically, what could you all have done better, right? We're not trying to point fingers. We're just saying we really need to learn from this, right? Should we maybe be fast-tracking this so that the next time there's heavy rain, the risk, at least people know about the risk. You don't want to be blindsided by something. And, I was up in Fairview, North Carolina, not too long ago as well, near Craigtown, where a whole family was essentially wiped out in a landslide. So this is very real. This has happened to real people, and at least 31 people linked to landslide deaths right now. And they're going out, the state, and their small team of geologists, they're going out, they're trying to identify every landslide they can. But they're basically now saying we need more money to really get the word out, to finish this project. And at the end of the day, there's the cost of the human toll, too, of what could we have done sooner.
I think it was interesting, too, you mentioned earlier, kind of surprising that this wasn't done earlier, considering it maybe isn't as much money as you'd think for some of these other programs.
$500,000 for a state budget, but we don't even have a state budget, so that's part of
true.
it, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to kind of find specific funding bills to make it happen. But you also had, different politics at play, which we're going to go into tonight at 11.
Okay.
It seems like most people can agree now that this is the right thing to do, but of course we have Helene that got us to this point. And might I mention that this was started after 2 hurricanes, was paused, and then it was restarted after more deadly landslides. So there's a bit of a pattern here repeating itself. And shouldn't people have a right to know how safe their property is? That's what this really comes down to.
And not losing momentum after something as awful as Helene. We're over a year past it at this point. How do people pick up that momentum to make sure these things get solved before something else happens?
Yeah, whenever I call someone who's dealt with something incredibly traumatic, I feel terrible. I don't know if you do, but I don't want to have to do that. When I reached out to Jamie, I said, I really don't want to have to ask you this and have to go through it all again. He goes, no, I feel obligated. If
Wow.
I can help save another family, I feel like that is now my duty. And I should also mention, they live up against another mountain, and they don't know if that mountain's at risk of a landslide.
Oh, right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
They had to
Wow.
move houses because their house is gone.
Yeah.
And so imagine the trauma of that. Every night there's a heavy rain. Is the mountain going to cave down on us again? And he's got a young boy who's just such a sweet kid. We got to see them playing Legos together. But when it rains, they're terrified. Not only did their wife and mother die, they came 60 to 70 feet down a bank into the river after a landslide washed them down. So this is a very difficult situation, and there's so much courage there in talking about this with us, because I think that we all can learn from these kind of stories, and it's really on us. That's something we have to do. We're obligated to learn from the past so it doesn't repeat itself.
And to bring attention to it, so hopefully it gets the momentum it needs.
Yep, and we're going to be pushing out to lawmakers soon as well throughout this series to figure out where do they stand, what kind of money might be available, particularly in the western North Carolina counties that really are going to need this as they rebuild. You don't want to rebuild in places that are near or past landslides. It might not have been in Helene, but what if there was a landslide 500 years ago on a site you're thinking about building?
There is an element of time to this, too. It may not be in a state budget. It might need to be a separate bill just to get this done quickly.
Get the funding. We were in Swananoa, I'll just leave you with this too, and we were at a camp, basically, that was wiped out by this 3/4 of a mile landslide. It started with a small piece of land on saturated ground. It loosened up. It went 3/4 of a mile, right? And it was near a mountain stream. Thankfully, people had already evacuated. But what the state director told me, had they just moved it a little bit, now that we know that, maybe they could avoid the landslide altogether. And they built a school somewhere else recently using this data, saying, you just got to move it a little bit. And if you move it, you should be protected.
Wow.
So it's just trying to use some reasonable steps to protect us.
Well, Nate, this is obviously really important work. We appreciate you coming on here, too, to walk us through it.
Yeah, thanks for uplifting it.
All right. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back in 2 minutes.